People keep talking about OpenClaw like it's this thrilling glimpse of the future, this open source super agent, this historic GitHub rocket ship. And yes, technically the repo is enormous, roughly 339,000 stars and more than 5,000 open issues, and hundreds of security items visible on the repo, which is a very funny set of numbers if you're trying to market confidence. That is not a green flag. That is a firework factory with a waitlist. Because OpenClaw is not just insecure. It's insecure in this very uniquely modern way where the hype wave is way ahead of the patch cycle. And everybody is just pretending that it's a personality trait and not a catastrophe. And I know a lot of people are going to go, well, every fast-growing open source project is going to have some issues. And sure, every restaurant has a dishwasher. That is not the same as serving food out of the dumpster. Now, OpenClaw doesn't just have some issues. The repo's own security surface reads more like an I dare you. Their GitHub repo shows a recent critical security advisory that was published on March 26th and March 27th. This week, not ancient history. And then you've got that audit from back in February. The one that it said it found 29 high and critical issues, 14 critical, 15 high. And the details are incredible. Default admin scope for operators. Eval with user input. CDP exposed on 0.0.0.0. Chromium launches with no sandbox mode. Docker socket bind mount risks. I mean, at some point it stops sounding like security risks and starts sounding like someone tried to speedrun the OWASP top 10 while sleep deprived. And my favorite part about that whole audit is the detail that it was performed by Shelby, Claude-based AI assistant running OpenClaw using Claude code. And that may be the most OpenClaw sounding thing about OpenClaw I've ever heard. I mean, the product is so vibe coded that even the security audit shows up like, good news, I was also vibe coded by the same situation. Now, imagine if actual people look at the code, what kind of stuff they would find if all of this was done automatically. And whether this thing was actually completely vibe coded, it was agentically engineered, because whatever term you use, the result is the same. A massively popular code base with a very public record of very serious security issues. Real problems, like the kind of problems where NVD entries exist. CVE 2026-24764, where GitHub says Slack channel description could be incorporated into the system prompt, creating a prompt injection path that could trigger unintentional tool use or data exposure, which is amazing. We have now reached a point where your Slack channel has now become the backdoor into your infrastructure. But the incident history gets worse. It goes from messy to, are you kidding me? Everybody already heard about that Moltbook exposure. 1.49 million API keys leaked. And yes, to be fair, the issue does say those were actually Moltbook platform keys and not everyone's Anthropic or OpenAI keys. Unless they explicitly put those into Moltbook. Fine. Wonderful. Thank God the giant secret spill had some nuance to it. But that is exactly the problem with OpenClaw. Everything is phrased like some kind of a technical clarification after the building has already fallen over. Well, okay, yes, 1.5 million records were exposed, but... Now, just stop right there. If you have to start your sentence with 1.5 million records were exposed, but you're not winning the conversation. You're just losing it with footnotes. And then there's the scale problem. Security Scorecard said there are tens of thousands of visible OpenClaw instances. The register's write-up put the number at more than 135,000 internet-exposed instances, and that OpenClaw bound by default all network interfaces, including the public internet. That is the default. That is a cry for help. That's right. Out of the box, it listens on all interfaces. Now, for a system that can take actions on your behalf, access API, manipulate services, and in some deployments, can act with very broad privileges. That is not developer friendly. That is, what if localhost, but the entire planet? And then you've got Jensen Huang out there, promoting OpenClaw like it's the second coming of software. Which, from Nvidia's point of view, makes total sense. OpenClaw is exactly the type of thing that turns AI from a demo into a permanent utility bill. More agents, more steps, more tools, more tokens, more inference, more GPU. It's not even subtle. And then Nvidia announced NemoClaw for the OpenClaw ecosystem, which essentially puts OpenClaw in jail and offers some privacy controls and whitelists for what it can do and which network services it can reach out to, while pitching agentic AI as the next infrastructure wave. So when Jensen talks about OpenClaw like it's the future, maybe he's right. It's certainly a future where Nvidia gets paid every time your little AI goblin goes into an infinite loop while trying to sort a CSV file. Fantastic. I'm 100% sure it's more secure. And I'm also sure that the exact people who need it most are the ones who will never install it. Because the person who's reckless enough to raw dog OpenClaw and install it as is definitely not the sort to be concerned about its open security issues. Because the sort of person who's going to raw dog OpenClaw is definitely not the same person who's going to be concerned whether it has enterprise level security or not. He's not going to go read the docs. He's not going to configure policies. The word sandbox probably doesn't even mean anything to him. He's just going to say, Claude, install OpenClaw. And then 6 hours later wonder why his crypto wallet's been drained. And this is where the whole botnet thing becomes less of a prediction and more of a pattern recognition. When Security Scorecard says exposed OpenClaw instances can become targets for abuse and remote code execution and infrastructure misuse. And outside reporting has already confirmed that threat actors have begun taking over OpenClaw instances and turning them into a botnet used for scraping for vulnerabilities. You don't get to act surprised when people say this is going to end up in a large-scale DDoS attack. This is not hysteria, it's just following the arrows. Because what is a botnet? Really, it's just a pile of other people's bad decisions. Coordinated, that is all. A distributed monument to, we'll harden it later, and OpenClaw has all the ingredients. Huge popularity, broad deployment, and lots of exposed endpoints. Known severe flaws, a history of mishandling sensitive credentials, and an ecosystem already attractive to attackers. That is the recipe. The only missing ingredient is time. And you can already hear the future post-mortem. We did not anticipate attackers would have exploited exposed autonomous AI agents distributed at scale. Really? You didn't anticipate it? It's a globally distributed pile of machines with paths to code executions, all kinds of API credentials, and a ton of known vulnerabilities. And it never occurred to you that cybercrime rings or bad state actors might see that more as a group project. And that's the thing about OpenClaw. It's not that it just has vulnerabilities. Every software has some vulnerabilities. It's that it combines those software vulnerabilities with agent privileges, exposed infrastructure, and default behaviors that enlarge the attack surface. And a culture that seems to be spiritually aligned with ship first, apologize later. So when people ask, is OpenClaw a security nightmare? I think that's underselling it. A nightmare is random. A nightmare is irrational. OpenClaw is worse because its problems are documented. They have issue numbers. They have advisories. They have precise binding addresses. This is not just fear-mongering. It's basically a nightmare with an implementation guide for how to build your first malicious botnet.